The fluorescent lights of the executive floor hummed their lonely midnight song as Maria Rodriguez pushed her cleaning cart past walls lined with portraits of men in expensive suits. She didn't belong in their world, and they had made that clear in 1,000 small ways. But tonight, as she rounded the corner toward the CEO's private office, she would discover that sometimes the distance between two worlds can be crossed in a single breath, in a single, desperate act of courage that defies every rule society has written. Maria's hands were raw from chemicals, her back ached from double shifts, and her daughter's medical bills sat like stones in her pocket. She was 32 but felt ancient, worn down by a system that seemed designed to keep people like her exactly where they were. Yet she pushed forward, because that's what mothers do. They endure. They survive. They sacrifice everything for the chance to give their children something better. The office was supposed to be empty. Everyone had left hours ago. Everyone except the man who owned the building, the company, and probably half the city. Alexander Chen, the billionaire CEO whose face graced magazine covers and business journals, who lived in a world so far removed from Maria's that they might as well have been on different planets. But when Maria opened the door, she found him collapsed on the floor, his face turning blue, his body convulsing in violent spasms. For a split second, she froze. This man represented everything she resented about inequality, about the vast chasm between the haves and have-nots. His watch probably cost more than her annual salary. His indifference to people like her was legendary among the cleaning staff. Yet when she looked at him, she didn't see a billionaire. She saw someone dying. Maria's mother had been a nurse in Mexico before immigrating, and she'd taught Maria the basics. She recognized anaphylactic shock immediately. The swollen throat, the desperate gasping, the way his fingers clawed uselessly at his collar. An EpiPen lay on the desk, just out of his reach, knocked there in his collapse. But even as Maria grabbed it and jammed it into his thigh, she knew it wouldn't be enough. His airway was closing too fast. She had seconds to make a decision that would haunt her forever. In her first aid training, the certification she'd gotten at the community college between shifts, hoping it might lead to a better job someday, they'd covered extreme allergic reactions. When the throat closes completely and breathing stops, you have 4 minutes before brain damage begins. The EpiPen would help, but his airway was already blocked. She needed to perform a rescue breath, to force air past the swelling before it was too late. Her hands shook as she tilted his head back. She thought about the security cameras, about the HR policies, about how this would look. A Latina janitor, her lips on the CEO's lips. In a country quick to judge, quick to assume the worst about people like her, this single act could destroy what little she had. They would call her opportunistic. They would say she assaulted him. They would make her the villain in a story where she was trying to be the hero. But then she remembered her daughter Sophia's face, the way Sophia looked at her like she could fix anything, like she was brave enough to face the world. What lesson would Maria teach her daughter if she let a man die because she was afraid? She pressed her mouth to his and breathed. Once, twice, 3 times. His chest rose and fell with her breath, her life force becoming his. She could feel the EpiPen starting to work, could feel the tension in his body beginning to ease. After 30 seconds that felt like 30 years, he gasped on his own. Color flooded back into his face. His eyes fluttered open, confused and disoriented. Maria pulled back immediately, her heart pounding. "You're okay," she whispered. "Don't move. I called 911. They're coming." Alexander stared at her, trying to process what had happened. "You saved my life," he managed, his voice hoarse. "I did what anyone would do," Maria said, already backing toward the door. Already running from the consequences. Wait. But she was gone, her cart abandoned in the hallway, leaving only her first name tag on the floor where it had fallen. The paramedics found Alexander 15 minutes later, fully recovered but shaken. The security footage told a story that spread through the company like wildfire. By morning, the board members had watched it. By afternoon, the news outlets had gotten hold of it. By evening, Maria's face was on television screens across the country. She learned about her sudden fame when reporters showed up at her tiny apartment in Queens, cameras flashing, questions flying. Her neighbors stared. Sophia hid behind her mother's legs, frightened by the chaos. Maria wanted to disappear, to sink into the earth and vanish. She had simply tried to help someone, And now her privacy, her anonymity, her protection, all of it was gone. The public response split along predictable lines. Some called her a hero. Others questioned her motives, suggested she'd orchestrated the whole thing, insisted there must be more to the story. The comments sections filled with poison, with people who couldn't imagine that someone might simply do the right thing without expecting a reward. But Alexander Chen saw something different in that footage. He watched it dozens of times, studying the moment when Maria made her choice. He saw her hesitation, her fear, and then her courage. He saw someone who had every reason to walk away and chose not to. In a world where he was surrounded by people who wanted something from him, who calculated every interaction, who saw him as a means to an end, Maria had seen him as simply human. He found her 3 days later, arriving at her apartment without the reporters, without the cameras. Just a man at a door, holding an envelope. "I didn't come to offer you money," he said when she answered, Sophia peeking around her mother's waist. "I came to say thank you. And to tell you that you were wrong about one thing." Maria crossed her arms, protective. "What's that? You said you did what anyone would do. But you didn't. Most people would have been afraid. Most people would have thought about the consequences first. You thought about saving a life. That's not common. That's extraordinary." "I'm not extraordinary," Maria said. "I'm just a person trying to survive." "Maybe that's what makes it extraordinary," Alexander replied. He held out the envelope. "This is information about a position in our company. It's not charity, it's a job you're qualified for. Medical office manager. You have first aid certification, you're bilingual, you've managed the logistics of 2 jobs and raising a daughter alone. But it's your choice. You don't owe me anything." Maria didn't take the envelope immediately. She studied his face, looking for the catch, for the hidden strings. "Why?" "Because you reminded me of something I'd forgotten," Alexander said softly. "That the measure of a person isn't what they have. It's what they do when they have nothing to gain and everything to lose. You could have let me die. No one would have blamed you. But you risked everything to save a stranger." 6 months later, Maria sat in her new office on the 10th floor, still adjusting to having windows, to having benefits that covered Sophia's medical care, to being addressed as Ms. Rodriguez instead of just the janitor. She hadn't become a billionaire. She hadn't married into wealth like some fairy tale. She had simply been given a chance to use her skills, to build something better for herself and her daughter. Alexander had kept his distance, professional and respectful. But sometimes she caught him watching her in meetings, and she understood. She had saved more than his life that night. She had reminded him that humanity still existed, that kindness without expectation was possible, that the walls between their worlds were thinner than they seemed. The story had faded from the news cycle, replaced by newer dramas. But Maria knew the truth that the cameras had missed. She hadn't changed his world that night in his office. He had changed hers simply by seeing her, truly seeing her, as more than her circumstances. And sometimes, in a world obsessed with fairy tales and billionaire saviors, the real magic is simpler than that. Sometimes it's just about 2 people recognizing each other's humanity. Sometimes it's about a woman brave enough to cross every line to save a life. Sometimes it's about a man humble enough to recognize that the person scrubbing his floors might have more courage than everyone in his boardroom combined. The kiss that saved Alexander Chen's life lasted 15 seconds. But the ripples of that moment, the reminder that we are all, ultimately, just humans who need each other, would last forever.